Welcome to Pressure Points. Our topic is Apple earnings. And before I jump into the pressure point, I'm just going to give some context about where we're at with the stock and what the general highlights of at least the March quarter and the June guide were. And as where we're at with the stock is this recording, which is a couple hours after the conference call ended, the stock's down, call it 4%, which is essentially at where the lows are in the after hours. It had some fluctuations. It was at one point down like 2.5%, but we're at down just about 4% here. And as far as the March quarter, it was solid. Revenue was a little bit better than expected, up 5% a year. That is compared to last quarter, where it was up 4%, and in the September 24 quarter, it was up 6%. If you look at the 10 quarters, previous quarters, it's been up about 0.5%. And so when you think about Apple's growth, it's improved measurably over the past 3 quarters. In terms of the gross margin, it was up 20 basis points sequentially. The products revenue up 3% year over year. In terms of the services, up 12% a year. Again, those two were a little bit better than expected. And then as for guidance, they said they expect revenue to be in the low to mid single digits for the June quarter. The street is at plus 3%. So I put that in the low to mid single digits. Mid single digits is 5. You could argue that that was a little bit better than expectations. They did say that the impact of tariffs adding costs, it would add about 900 million in additional costs in the June quarter. So that effectively would take about 4% out of EBITDA for the quarter. If you assume that for the year that headwind goes away in the September quarter, that would have a 1% negative impact on the calendar year. But in terms of if you're just going to zero in on the June quarter, it's a 4% impact on that quarter. So in total, I think that the March results and the June guide were really solid. So that begs the question about why is the stock down about 4% in the after hours, which gets me to the pressure point. And I think the narrative or the uncertainty about what happens beyond the June quarter is at the center of that softness in the stock. And specifically is that on the conference call, there were 10 analysts who asked questions. Each of them asked basically 2 questions. So there were 20 total questions. 6 of those 20 questions in the follow-up had to do with the outlook beyond the June quarter. And as I went through and looked at the responses, I think that none of them really were definitive answers. And that is in part of any company that gets asked a question about what happens in 6 months. The reality is they don't know, and they should say as much. In this environment, I think it adds just a little bit of more nervousness to investors' outlook. And then there was some language that I think stood out in terms of how Cook talked, and a question from Ben Righteous related to the impact of kind of tariffs. And I'm going to read you the quote. He talks about Section 232, that investigation going on, and mentioned that it's very difficult to predict beyond the June quarter. Very difficult, his exact words. That's something that usually we don't hear Cook use that type of language, and I think that kind of stood out. So as far as what is Section 232, that basically is this government evaluating which products are going to be tariffed. And essentially Cook doesn't know. And that's good to know that he doesn't know. And as close as he is to the Trump administration, he's operating in an environment, at least what he's telling the public, that it's just something difficult for him to get his arms around. And so I think those 6 questions, they weren't all related to tariffs. Some related to Apple Intelligence, but I think kind of spoke to this question about what happens going forward. And I think the going forward piece, investors should actually feel okay about it and feel good about it. And part of the reason is that Cook has been somebody who's done an incredible job over the years navigating these Cat 5 hurricanes. And he's going to be the same person. He did a great job in March. The outlook looks like he's going to do a great job. And I think investors should give him a little bit more credit in terms of his ability to continue to do that for whatever happens in the September and December quarters. But that's the pressure point, is the uncertainty after the June quarter. I'm going to step back and just hit a couple other topics that I thought were going to be the important topics going into earnings. And first, those was tariffs. that was another topic that dominated the call. Of those 20 questions on the call, there were 7 that were related to tariffs. So that was definitely a big topic. Again, they didn't really give much context beyond that $900 million cost impact in the June quarter. The second was related to production. And on the production side, this, of course, is what's being manufactured in China. And they basically highlighted that Tim Cook is doing what Tim Cook does so well, is making adjustments to the supply chain. And he shifted emphasis to Vietnam and India in terms of producing iPhones. Half of iPhones in the US came from India, shifting that production to the US to basically avoid some of the biggest tariffs. The rest of the world was still largely being supplied by China. And if you kind of put that whole mix together, it's still between 40, based on my estimates, 40 to 45% of Apple's total revenue is in some form being manufactured in China. And so it's still a big piece. And related to production, he did mention that they identified a few years ago that there is risk to be tied to one region, that being China, and that it's important for them to continue to diversify away from that. So, of course, we're going to hear more about that diversification. He did kick off the call with comments about what they're investing in the US, and kind of the simple takeaway is not a lot of it is related to actual manufacturing, even though that $500 billion number that they came out with a while ago, it's still, most of that manufacturing is going to come from outside of the US. So that was the production piece. And the last kind of topic that I was keyed in on to was any comments in terms of Apple Intelligence. And he reiterated some of the same language he had in the previous quarter. In the December quarter, we said that areas where Apple Intelligence is available, they saw better growth. iPhone this quarter up 2% sequentially, and that did not include a pull forward from tariffs, which I think is a favorable sign. But he also talked about the fact that the personalized version of Siri isn't at where they want it to, and it has to hit that kind of quality threshold. He did not give any updated timing in terms of when to expect that available. And the company did say a few weeks ago that that would be early in 2026. So effectively that still stands, but he's being on this position that they just have to get the product right. He emphasized that they're doing some of their own models now. These aren't be large language models, but some of the smaller models to kind of power some of those experiences, showing some independence from OpenAI and Gemini in the future. And then the last piece in terms of Apple Intelligence is related to when we're going to see China. And even though they added simplified Mandarin to one of the languages that it can communicate in, there still wasn't any update in terms of when we'd see Apple Intelligence actually become available. We still have to come up with a partner, a large language model partner in the region. And so that one I had expected to be sorted out by now. And so we're still waiting on that. So those are some of the other topics. When you put all this together and think about the headwinds that are going on now, I still believe that we're going to see acceleration in 2026, call it from 4 to the streets at 7% growth for next year. I feel good about that number. And I think one of the important pieces around Apple Intelligence is they have more time than people realize to get this right. Apple users aren't going anywhere. They're locked into this ecosystem. And I think that they probably have 2 or 3 years to sort this whole Apple Intelligence thing out before they start actually losing anybody. So that's it for Pressure Points. Bye for now.